The stench hit you first. Always the stench. A putrid cocktail of human waste, rotting vegetables, coal smoke, and death that clung to your clothes, your hair, your very skin, until you couldn't remember what clean air smelled like. In the winter of 1851, in a crumbling tenement off Dorset Street in London's Spitalfields district, Mary Sullivan pressed her 3 children against her body in a room barely 8 feet square. The walls wept with condensation. Black mold bloomed in the corners like some grotesque garden. Through gaps in the floorboards, she could hear the family below, 12 souls crammed into a space no larger than her own, coughing through the night. The youngest had whooping cough. She knew the sound. She'd lost 2 children to it already. As dawn broke over the greatest city in the world, casting a sickly yellow light through a window so filthy it might as well have been painted black, Mary Sullivan made the same calculation she made every morning. Would today be the day she couldn't keep them all alive? This was life in the Rookeries, the festering slums that spread like a disease through the heart of Victorian London. These weren't merely poor neighborhoods, they were descents into something approaching hell on earth. Vertical cities of desperation where tens of thousands lived, bred, worked, and died in conditions that would shock the modern conscience into silence. The Rookeries had names that dripped with dark poetry: Devil's Acre, the Old Nickel, Jacob's Island, the Mint. Each was a kingdom unto itself, governed not by law but by violence, desperation, and an economy built on everything respectable society refused to acknowledge. To enter a rookery was to cross an invisible border into a different world, one that existed in the shadow of Victorian prosperity, growing fat on the Industrial Revolution's refuse. Before we descend further into this world, I want to take a moment to speak with you directly. If you're finding value in these deep dives into forgotten history, if these stories of real people who lived, struggled, and endured are connecting with you, please consider subscribing and supporting this community. These narratives take extensive research and time to craft accurately and respectfully, and your support keeps them alive and helps us continue to uncover the voices history tried to silence. Now, let's return to Victorian London, to Mary Sullivan and the thousands like her, trapped in a nightmare built by the same society that was building palaces and railways, that was painting itself as the pinnacle of human civilization. The Rookeries weren't always slums. Many had begun centuries earlier as respectable neighborhoods, even fashionable ones. But as London exploded during the Industrial Revolution, its population doubling from 1 million in 1800 to 2 million by 1850, the wealthy moved west and north, abandoning their old townhouses to landlords who saw opportunity in desperation. These properties were subdivided, then subdivided again, then subdivided once more, until a house that had sheltered a single wealthy family now contained 50 or 60 souls. Families rented single rooms. The truly destitute rented corners of rooms, or shares of a bed in rotating shifts. 8 hours for sleeping, then you had to give up your spot to the next person. The architecture of the Rookeries reflected their history and their horror. Tall, narrow buildings leaned against each other like drunks, their foundations sinking into cesspools of their own waste. Staircases rotted until they became death traps. Floors sagged under the weight of too many human bodies. In St. Giles, one of London's most notorious rookeries, buildings were connected by rickety bridges and tunnels, creating a 3-dimensional labyrinth where police feared to enter and criminals could disappear in seconds. Streets, if you could call them that, were often no more than 3 feet wide, mere alleys where sunlight never penetrated and the air sat still and heavy, thick with disease. Water was a luxury and a curse. The poorest rookeries had no running water at all. Residents drew water from communal pumps, often contaminated by the very cesspits that sat mere feet away. The connection between sewage and disease wasn't understood, wouldn't be proven until John Snow's famous Broad Street pump investigation in 1854. So people drank death and wondered why God was punishing them. Those rookeries that did have water often had it worse. Shared taps ran perhaps an hour a day, triggering desperate rushes with buckets and pails. Children fought over position. Water was spilled, wasted, contaminated further. Sanitation was medieval at best, nightmarish at worst. In Jacob's Island, the notorious slum immortalized by Charles Dickens in Oliver Twist, houses were built directly over open ditches filled with sewage and industrial waste. These weren't sewers. Sewers implied flow, maintenance, purpose. These were stagnant trenches of filth where rats grew fat and children played because there was nowhere else to go. Privies, when they existed, were shared by dozens or even hundreds of people. More commonly, residents simply threw their waste into the courtyards, the streets, the ditches. In 1849, during a cholera outbreak, Health Inspector Hector Gavin visited the Rookeries and documented courtyards literally carpeted in human excrement, accumulated to depths of several inches, baked hard by summer sun, or churned into liquid mud by rain. The smell was indescribable. Those who lived there claimed they stopped noticing after a while, that the nose simply surrendered and stopped reporting. But visitors, journalists, reformers, slumming aristocrats looking for thrills, wrote of retching uncontrollably, of being unable to eat for days after, of nightmares filled with that terrible stench. The air itself seemed thick, almost visible, a miasma that the Victorians believed carried disease. They were wrong about the mechanism, but right about the conclusion. Disease did ride that air: tuberculosis, typhus, cholera, typhoid, smallpox, scarlet fever. The Rookeries were incubators for epidemics that would sweep out into respectable London, killing indiscriminately, reminding the comfortable that the walls between their world and the Rookeries were thinner than they liked to believe. Life began early in the Rookeries because sleep was difficult and there was work to be found, however degrading. The streets came alive before dawn with a tide of humanity flowing toward their various desperations. Women and children headed to sweatshops, cramped, airless rooms where they sewed clothing for 16 hours a day, paid by the piece, earning perhaps 3 or 4 shillings a week if they were fast and lucky. The work destroyed eyesight and posture. Women developed permanently curved spines from hunching over needlework in dim light. Children's fingers bled from pushing needles through heavy fabric. But the work was there, and in the Rookeries, any work was better than none. Men sought heavier labor. They gathered at docks, hoping to be selected for a day's work loading or unloading ships. Henry Mayhew, the journalist who documented London's poor with unprecedented thoroughness in his London Labour and the London Poor, described scenes of hundreds of desperate men crushing forward, hands raised, begging to be chosen, while overseers selected perhaps 20. Those not chosen returned to the Rookeries to explain to hungry children why there was no food today. Some turned to street selling. Anything that could be hawked might bring in pennies. Mayhew catalogued them: sellers of matches, bootlaces, rat poison, second-hand clothes, rotting fruit, dubious meat pies, and stranger things still. Children worked from age 5 or 6, their small fingers valued in match factories, their small bodies perfect for chimney sweeping, a profession that slowly suffocated them with soot and regularly burned them alive when they became stuck in hot flues. The Factory Acts had begun to limit the worst abuses, but enforcement was laughable in the Rookeries, where authority barely penetrated, and desperate parents would lie about their children's ages for a few extra pennies a week. Food was whatever you could afford, which meant it was generally terrible and occasionally poisonous. Bread was adulterated with alum to make it whiter and heavier. Milk was watered down and colored with chalk or sheep's brains to hide the dilution. Tea was recycled tea leaves mixed with tree bark and colored with lead. Coffee was roasted acorns and chicory. Butter was often rancid lard dyed yellow. The truly desperate ate things that would make a modern person vomit: spoiled vegetables picked from refuse heaps, bread so moldy it was green, meat so rotten it glowed in the dark with bacterial luminescence. Street vendors sold saveloys and polonies, sausages of uncertain provenance that were rumored to contain everything from diseased donkey to dog to rat. The rumors were probably true. A family in the Rookeries might survive on bread and weak tea for days at a time. Meat was a Sunday luxury if fortune smiled. Vegetables were increasingly rare, contributing to epidemics of scurvy and rickets. Children grew up stunted, their bones soft, their teeth rotten or missing entirely by adolescence. The average height of a working-class man in Victorian London was 5 inches shorter than his middle-class contemporary. Literal proof that poverty was eating away at human bodies, generation after generation.